Welcome to Own It. On this very special and timely episode, we are talking with Will Wiard, Sides Managing Broker for DC, Maryland, and Virginia, who are very much intertwined with what is going on in Washington, DC at the moment. We are hearing so much about the housing market crashing, mass exodus. Let's talk to Will and find out what is reality over on the East Coast. What can our friends in real estate, our families, clients, what should they know about the DC market right now? And let's get that up-to-date info now. So join us.
Yeah, so inventory and the absorption rate, if we're going to speak real estate terms, right? The absorption rate is about a month, maybe a month and a half of inventory directly around the DC area. Historically, in the last 22 to 24 months, prices have gone up, but sales have gone down because of the lack of inventory. And every 4 years, as we've discussed before, there's a change in the political landscape, which causes some kind of movement. Now more than ever, I think it's become apparent that it's kind of jump-started the spring market here.
Welcome to the special episode of Own It. Hot topic of the day is the DC mass exodus. Joined today by my illustrious co-host, Spencer Kroll, and our very talented guest, Will Wiard. Hello, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Good day.
Good day, good afternoon.
This is such a fascinating thing because this is, people are talking, whatever your politics are, but a lot of people are saying, I'm leaving the country, right? I'm going to leave the country. And now people are apparently saying, I'm leaving DC, or at least that's what they're reporting. So, Will, true or false?
Well, it's one of two. Right now we have...
It's either true or false.
I like that. Well said. And that wraps up the episode today.
Yeah, I cannot say it's one way or the other 100%, Spencer. What I would say is as of February 10th, 17,000 federal workers were called back into the office. Mm-hmm. And, parallel with that, we have 60,000, I think was the last number that has been publicly released, that have taken early retirement. So you have 17,000 that have said, hey, come back into DC, regardless of where you are, post-COVID. And then we have 60,000 plus, technically, based on what the news stated as of today, that are like, hey, I'll, to your point, leave the country or leave DC. Who knows?
Yeah. So wait, let's take a step back and just talk 2024 was last year, I believe. Real estate industry, housing, what was the housing availability in and around the DC major metro? Was inventory up, down, hard to get? What was the lay of the land?
Yeah, so inventory and the absorption rate, if we're going to speak real estate terms, right? The absorption rate is about a month, maybe a month and a half of inventory directly around the DC area, right? And then historically, in the last 22 to 24 months, prices have gone up, but sales have gone down because of the lack of inventory. So with this kind of, and every 4 years, as we've discussed before, there's a change in the political landscape, which causes some kind of movement. But now more than ever, I think it's become apparent that it's kind of jump-started the spring market here.
All right.
That's a nice way of saying it.
I'm just going to say, what are agents saying about all of this? Are there I'm assuming this is a conversation people have every 4 years, like you just said. How is the conversation different right now? What's they saying on the ground?
That's a great question. We have partners of ours in the side community that are a little bit more on the outskirts of the DC area. We call that outside the Beltway versus inside the Beltway. They are actually getting calls from people that work for the federal government that are being called back in. And so they are, hey, I might need to rent out my house. Rentals are forecasted to go up across the DC metro area because most of them have purchased at, within the last 2 to 3 years where interest rates were historically low or under 4%. Now they're, right in 6 and above, I think is the national average right now. So they're looking at a unique scenario where they're not selling. They might sell, they might need to sell, but historically, for those that are on the outskirts, are looking to rent and possibly rent or purchase something smaller closer into the DC area, where you have other partners of ours that are DC centric, and they're hearing from their past clients that are, hey, I'm in limbo right now. I don't know where I'm going to be in 3 to 6 months. Maybe I'll be here. Maybe I won't be. Maybe I'll be in Boca. Who knows, right? Or Cabo. But those are some of the conversations that are being had. But it's a direct reflection of the current political landscape, which we're only about 3.5 weeks into. So
Yeah, isn't that amazing? 3.5 weeks in, and we're having this conversation.
Yeah.
I know. I had it on my agenda for like May, right? Like, let's have a conversation of how the housing market has really adapted one way or the other. But it is fascinating because we just talked to Carol Houston down in LA, and different situation, obviously, but migration, right? Like, do we stay or do we go?
Yeah, and we're talking about because of the fires that we had there.
Right.
The winter we're talking about, yeah. Because it's going to be it's going to be mudslides after this week, right? So we're just talking about the fires right now.
But also, this is something where the spring market is not here yet, but there's a lot of motion. There's a lot of movement. So, the daily conversation that I'm having with our partners is, encourage your prospects or encourage your past clients or current clients to have the conversations now if you're on the listing side, but also be mindful on the buyer side because we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know where things are going to be. From what I understand and, from what I've seen, the interest rates aren't dropping, quickly anytime soon. So you're still going to have that element. But if you have, 60,000, you take a third of that, if, just as an estimate that might move out of the area or might transition to somewhere else, that's a huge injection of inventory to a market. And that will, as we all know, supply and demand might affect the prices, overall, but time will tell. But that right now is, the temperature of what's going on.
It sounds like in your market, though, that every 4 years you're used to some sort of upheaval or whatever it's going to be. Now, maybe it's not as dramatic as it is right now. But is there advice or is there anything that you did as an agent where you prepare? I'm just curious, is there anything people do to prepare for the change in administrations? You have a couple of months run up for that. What advice do you give to agents when they're dealing in the DC area?
Great question, Spencer. Each time there's a new administration or even the same administration, military personnel, people who are assigned to a cabinet position will go through some element of transition, but usually that's anticipated and they kind of plan ahead. So it's kind of like when, if you look at other markets across the country, when like school starts or when summer finishes, you kind of can plan for an injection of activity, right? And so you kind of plan ahead for that. However, this is probably the biggest injection of activity or conversation since the 90s when Bill Clinton did a very similar thing, which they combined back then. I did some research prior to our call today, 800 federal agencies at the time, which affected about 250,000 employees. So although and that was, I think, the course of his administration. So we're now 3.5 weeks in, but we at least have some kind of example to go off of as, maybe not a roadmap, but some metrics to say, okay, how positive could this affect the market or how negatively could this affect the market? But overall, inventory has been low, so it might even things out, but time will tell.
Yeah, and when Clinton was in 92, we were looking at interest rates like hovering around 9% or something like that. So it's we've got quite a distance to go for that. So I'm curious what that does for people still being
Spencer,
able to buy
Will
places.
and I were like less than 10 years old, so
I was in utero.
Right.
I'm going off of stories that my grandparents tell me about this.
Well, what we tell them is, for the military, a lot of our partners and agents have military spouses or have military background, or are considered military relocation specialized. And, they have a specialty to help people move around. And that's just a part of our market landscape, which might not be, prudent in other markets. So that's something that we plan for, but are already kind of prepared for. But we're in a little bit of a gray area, as it is in terms of, what will the economy and what will the current market metrics look like, if we're 3.5 weeks in now today, and the next 3.5 weeks or the next 3.5 months. So,
right.
I wonder what you're seeing as far as rentals go, right? One of the things that we talked about previously was rent gouging in unfortunate situations when people can see the writing on the wall and all of a sudden the, $2,000 a month apartment is now $3,000 a month. Are you seeing any type of activity with listings of rentals going up or down or anything?
So a great question, Hillary. There's a lot of inventory at the corporate rental market, right? So there's not a lot of new construction for condos, not a new construction DC centric for, townhouses or anything. I mean, imagine building a house in DC. There is flips and there are properties that have been rehabbed, but for the most part, they're owned by a corporation. So that market kind of drives a lot of especially with the vacancy rates, how the secondary market or the private market for rentals will reflect that and react to it. Right now, I mean, we're seeing a tick up of rentals because of what's going on, and also with a freeze, as I understand it today, but from a hiring freeze from the federal government, you don't have this constant kind of revolving door of new people coming into positions. So you're kind of looking at this hybrid where people are now being called back into work. They might be renting, short-term or corporate housing, or might be looking for a 7-month lease instead of a full, 1-year lease because they don't know if they're on the bench, if they're going to still have the job, or their agency is going to be around in the next few months. But that's a real conversation people are having. At the same time, you have people in different positions that are like, all right, I'm back. This is where I'm going to be for the remainder of my career. So I have to find temporary housing now and then hopefully permanent housing. But those are all conversations that are being had right now. So overall, I would say I forecast, and everyone that I've talked to has forecast, that the rental market will be a hot ticket in the spring market, more so than the resale market.
That's interesting. It's so funny how many markets are so different from this. Being in the Los Angeles, Beverly Hills area, and dealing with Orange County and the surrounding areas, it's not as cyclical. Obviously, with entertainment, like where you see some shifts once in a while is when there's like a big change in entertainment, like when a lot of production moved out of state, but it wasn't anywhere close. It was a trickle. We had time to prep for it. This is like a tsunami of change in the market. So I guess the rental market is going to be the bellwether for how these things go for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall the consensus is change is good, or shocking the system is good for some degree of let's say productivity, or just trying to change things up to keep it from keeping it stale. However, I was telling Hillary the other day, a good friend of mine, I was having tea with him, and on a Friday he was looking forward to going on a new government assignment. Come Monday, that assignment no longer existed. So you times that by a few thousand, and there's a lot of conversations to be had, and so in conversations that haven't been had for a few decades, in terms of that kind of quick turnover.
Yeah,
where someone's been within this a government agency or a company for 10, 15 years, and then Friday you're looking forward to going to X, and come Monday no longer exists. Neither does the company. So
I wonder if the listing, if there's something to be said if someone is on the fence about listing and waiting for the quote unquote spring market, and they actually would be advised to list now before the flood of inventory shows up. That's one kind of perspective I just started thinking about. And then the second one is, what if you've got now a cohort of folks who bought with low interest rates and maybe took out HELOCs, and now come the influx of listings are not going to be able to get what they paid for, and we're going to see short sales.
That was something that was brought up by the chief economist locally, that had just sent out a report that those who waited in 2024 to list in 2025 to hopefully capitalize on a higher return might have missed the target.
Wow.
And at the same time might be subject to having to sell quickly versus being able to hold it. I mean, these are scenarios that are being played out everywhere, but that's a very very good point.
Yeah, I wouldn't have even come to that question, Hillary, for at least another week thinking about this. So that's pretty cool. No, it's just so odd. A lot of people also might turn into landlords. They can't sell, and now suddenly they're a landlord. And are they going to be? Where are they going to move back to? And the other thing too, which I found very interesting, is learning how much that a lot of government employees make, even what Congress people make, which kind of surprised me. Like they live in like group housing and stuff. They share houses and whatnot. But a lot of these things, I'm just curious where the inventory is money wise on these things too. Is there the quote unquote average house? Right? Like, are there certain areas where they're going to be hit harder than others, or is there a type of like a price range that you think is going to be hit hardest?
Well, I think through COVID, a lot of people had the opportunity to kind of disperse and offset a lot of the overhead that they had for housing by working remotely, being directly outside the Beltway, because the prices, fluctuate significantly inside the Beltway versus outside the Beltway due to closeness to work, those kind of things and amenities. But now with this call back to action, call back to work action, that is a nuance that you have to now plan for. But then also, you have to consider where they move to. And also the other aspect of this is, even though they say online, it's affecting this amount of government employees, not all government employees are DC based. So you have, a multitude of variables that play into it. But I'd say, for the most part, it's a matter of where, did you move out to the mountains somewhere and now you have to commute 3 hours into work? Versus, do you have the bandwidth to uplift your family if you are one of those individuals to move back in where rental rates haven't gone down, not yet at least, and for a 2-bedroom 2-bath might be double or triple potentially what your current mortgage rate is and what your mortgage payments are.
Yeah, the other thing too, which we haven't looked at, I guess, is how many people are in double income families also, right? Maybe this might not be as strong a hit for some people if they're, if one of them is a government employee and the other one might not be, or something, and how money wise, how that's going to affect the need to sell or the need to rent.
You also have 3 districts or jurisdictions. You have DC, Virginia, Maryland, which each one of them has their own state statutes and taxes. And I would say obviously the biggest one is Virginia, but, also taking into account the changes of just to kind of bring it into the conversation, Maryland just recently just introduced a new program for tenants where if you were going to sell your property, you now have to give the tenant the first right of refusal to purchase it. DC has had that for quite some time, called TOPA. Virginia doesn't have it currently, but that also, with all this shift and all this change, could be a factor in the event that you're on the outskirts of Maryland and now you're trying to commute back in. You're trying to do a tenant situation or something like that, and now you have to take that into consideration with if you're wanting to sell or if you're going to rent on the back end.
Sure. Wow. Who knew? Who knew you were like the mini? It's the San Francisco of the East Coast. Who knew? Right?
I wonder like takeaways for folks that are in the area, that are in the real estate industry. One came to mind just now is, if you haven't already made friends with moving companies, now is the time, because if I'm even considering moving, my first call may not be to my realtor, right? It might be to the moving company to say, what does it look like? How much is this going to cost? These are all things that people can do to take steps. So if you don't have friends in the moving industry, start making them now.
Yeah. Reach out to your realtor, reach out to your moving company. I think that's, to your point, Hillary, a lot of individuals in and around the area might not anticipate how much moving costs. And then it may be like Spencer had said in LA or Southern California with everything that's going on. I mean, there's secondary and third party services that, have an opportunity to capitalize on the unfortunate situation that aren't bound to the same ethical code that we are. So you never know.
Well, I would hang out. I would hang out at a bar, talk to a bartender, and find out who's up their alcohol intake and who's saying they have to leave town. Right? Look, we all have our ways. We all have our ways of prospecting, right? It's,
Yeah, and go to the gym, see who's putting in the extra hours of the gym on a more healthy, sweating out their stress.
Or go to the dry cleaner, see who's getting their suit pressed because they're interviewing. Right? This is anyway.
I mean, there's also a big uptick, fun fact, for therapists because of the current landscape. That now more than ever, and this is something that you can Google, have had high demand in and around the DMV area because of not just maybe the government shift, but also because of the political affiliation not winning the election. So I don't know if that's how true that fact is, but it's something to, I think, maybe reach out to a therapist and say,
Well,
hey,
a therapist with very poor ethics.
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I mean, they won't name names. They might just slide you an email, but
Well, the person at 123, Main Street is thinking of, I don't know their name, but they're thinking of selling.
Maybe you could sponsor their coffee machine and just put a sticker on their coffee maker.
yeah, instead of dropping by the car wash, just drop by every single one of the therapists and give them a little care package.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Hey, we could do a whole nother show on great ideas. But thank you, Will. This is great update. It's an ever-changing landscape, like we said, and it's fascinating to keep a pulse on it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And who knows? We'll maybe have a different conversation in 3 months, but time will tell.
Sure.
That is true. Time will tell. Thank you for joining us on this very special episode of On It. See you next week.